As Mary stood in the church, her heart pounded, and a wave of anxiety washed over her. Her eyes were locked on Stephen, the man she was about to marry, but her mind was racing with fear. In just a few moments, she would have to reveal the truth about herself, a secret she had kept hidden for so long. Mary knew that this was the moment of reckoning. She wondered if Stephen could truly accept her, with all the imperfections she had always concealed. The tension mounted as she felt the eyes of everyone in the church watching her closely. This moment would change everything, not only for her, but also for the love she and Stephen had built. What would you do if you had to reveal a secret that could change your entire life? Stay tuned to find out how the story unfolds. But before we dive into this unforgettable moment, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from viewers all over the world. Mary never thought that love would come unexpectedly. She always believed that love wasn't something you looked for, but rather something that would find you at the most appropriate time. She is a gentle white girl, always kind to everyone, and enthusiastic about life. People around her often admired her open heart and willingness to help others. Her friends would often joke that her heart was too big to contain all the love and kindness she gave to those around her. Yet, despite all the love she had given to others, she had never truly felt love for herself. That is until the day she met Stephen. That evening, Mary attended a charity fundraising event at the community center, where she often volunteered. She was used to staying in the background, quietly doing her work without seeking attention. But that night, everything changed when she first noticed Stephen. He was a tall black man, sitting in a corner of the room, his eyes gently observing the crowd with a quiet but warm smile. What caught Mary's attention wasn't the difference in their skin color or his strong appearance, but rather the calm and confident aura that radiated from him. Gradually, Mary's gaze kept finding its way back to Stephen, as if drawn to an invisible force. She had never felt this way before. The stolen glances toward him made her heart race faster, yet she didn't dare approach him. But it seemed fate had its plans. When the room became quieter, Stephen confidently approached her. "Hello," he said, his deep, warm voice filled with confidence. "I've noticed you from across the room. You seem like someone who's always helping and caring for everyone here." Mary was caught off guard by his attention. Her cheeks flushed as she looked down, smiling shyly. "I just like helping others," she replied, her voice soft but sincere. "It's what I do." Stephen chuckled, his eyes lighting up. "The world needs more people like you." Their conversation flowed naturally, as if they had known each other for years. They talked about everything, from the event that night to their interests, and finally, about life itself. Mary quickly realized that Stephen was a special person. He wasn't just intelligent and funny. He had a deep empathy for those around him. Despite his struggles, he never let life's challenges stop him from being kind and genuine. He wasn't just a strong man on the outside. He had a warm heart on the inside. But as the night came to an end, and Stephen gently handed Mary his phone number, she hesitated. In the days that followed, images of Stephen constantly appeared in her mind. There was something about him that had touched her heart, filling her with warmth and hope. However, part of her couldn't ignore the fact that he was a black man. She had never considered dating someone of a different race before, and that brought with it a mix of emotions. Those thoughts swirled in her mind. Would people judge them? Could love overcome such a big difference? And more importantly, with her physical disability, was she strong enough to face the challenges that a mixed-race relationship might bring? Despite the many unanswered questions, Mary couldn't ignore the connection she felt with Stephen. A week after the event, she decided to send him a message. Her message was simple, but her heart pounded as she waited for his reply. Stephen's response came quickly, and soon enough, they had planned their first date. On the day of their date, Mary was so nervous that she couldn't even eat breakfast. How would the date go? Would there be an awkward difference between them? But when Stephen walked into the cafe and smiled at her, all her worries melted away. His smile, the sincerity in his eyes, everything about him made Mary feel at ease. They sat together for hours, talking, laughing, and sharing stories about their lives. The most wonderful thing was that Stephen didn't make her feel like a disabled person. He saw her not through her wheelchair, but through her heart and soul. Gradually, Mary realized that she had started to fall in love. It wasn't because of their differences or circumstances, but because they had found a connection in their souls. A love not based on appearances or external things, but on a true bond between two people. Their feelings for each other grew stronger with each passing day. Stephen always treated her with such tenderness and care. He listened to her with deep interest, and every time they were together, she couldn't stop laughing at his funny stories. No one had ever made Mary feel as warm and loved as Stephen did. However, as their relationship deepened, a small seed of doubt began to grow in Mary's heart. Even though she loved Stephen dearly, she couldn't help but think about the differences between them. What challenges would they face in the future? Would people judge them for being together? And most importantly, did she have the strength to face the difficulties that her disability might bring to their marriage? One peaceful afternoon, as the last rays of the sun shone down on the park and the shadows grew long, Mary sat beside Stephen, the black man she loved. The quietness of the park surrounded them, but Mary's mind was far from peaceful. After days of pondering, she knew it was time to voice the worries that had been weighing on her heart. "Stephen," she began softly, her eyes gazing at the orange and gold sky. "I love you so much, but sometimes I can't help but worry. I've never been in a relationship like this before." Stephen turned to her, his gaze unwavering, filled with love and understanding. "You mean because of your disability, right?" he asked, his voice devoid of any bitterness or sadness. He understood Mary's concerns deeply. Mary lowered her head, feeling a bit guilty for bringing it up. She didn't want to hurt him, but she couldn't hide her insecurities any longer. Stephen gently took her hand, his fingers warm and steady. "I know this isn't easy for you," he said softly. "Your disability isn't something everyone can easily understand. But I want you to know, I don't love you despite it. I love you for who you are, regardless of whether you have a disability or not. Your disability doesn't define you, Mary." Stephen's words brought a flood of emotion to Mary's heart. At that moment, she realized that her love for him wasn't born out of pity or fear of their differences. She loved Stephen for his strength, his understanding, and his unwavering support. Stephen was the only one who could make her laugh during the toughest times, and he had always been there, listening to her thoughts without ever passing judgment. All the worries seemed to vanish after that evening. Their relationship deepened, and before long, Stephen knelt and proposed to Mary in the very same park where they had shared such emotional moments. Mary didn't hesitate, tears streaming down her face as she said yes. Her disability was no longer a barrier. The only thing that mattered was that she had found the true love of her life. Not long after, they began preparing for the wedding, the day when they would walk down the aisle and vow to spend their lives together. Their journey had not always been easy, but their love was real, stronger than any challenge they could face. And Mary knew that with Stephen, she had found the partner she had always dreamed of. As Mary began to prepare for her wedding, from picking the perfect white dress and deciding on the venue, to discussing flower arrangements, everything seemed almost unreal. Her wedding to Stephen, the man she loved with all her heart, was fast approaching, and she felt like she was living in a beautiful dream. But not everyone around her shared the same excitement. Mary's family and friends were initially supportive, as they saw the genuine love she had for Stephen. They also knew how happy Stephen made her, a joy she had rarely experienced before. Their relationship had transcended barriers and societal judgments. However, as the wedding day drew nearer, whispers and concerns began to emerge. Mary's relatives and friends, despite their good intentions, could not hide their worries about her future. Questions started to surface. Is she making the right choice? Can this marriage survive all the challenges they will face? One evening, while Mary was sitting in the living room of her parents' house, her mother, with a worried look in her eyes, turned to her. "My dear, I have to ask you something. Are you truly sure about marrying Stephen?" she asked, her voice gentle but filled with concern. Mary frowned, feeling a sense of unease rising. "Mom, I love Stephen. I'm sure of that," she replied, trying to stay calm. Her mother sighed, softly placing her teacup on the table. "I know you love him, Mary, but marriage is a big commitment. And you need to remember, marrying someone from such a different background as Stephen won't be easy. You have to think carefully about what life will bring you in the future." Mary's heart sank. This wasn't the first time she had heard these concerns. Her friends had given her similar advice, but hearing it from her mother made everything feel heavier. She had always known that life with Stephen might not always be simple, but to her, the love they shared was what mattered most. "Mom, Stephen being black doesn't change who we are. Stephen is still the man I love. Why is everyone making such a big deal out of this?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. Her mother looked at her with understanding. "It's not just about the color of his skin, sweetheart. It's everything you two will have to face. Are you ready for that? If your health worsens, if life becomes more difficult, will you be able to handle it? I just worry that you'll feel trapped by too much responsibility." That night, Mary lay in bed, staring at the ceiling while her mother's words echoed in her mind. Even though she loved Stephen, she couldn't help but think about what her mother had said. Was she truly prepared to face the challenges this marriage might bring? "What if Mom's right?" she whispered to herself. "What if things get too hard? What if I'm not strong enough?" The thought of life with Stephen had always filled her with joy, but now, the doubts from others seemed to weigh heavily on her. Could love be enough to carry them through whatever lay ahead? Mary knew that the answer could only be found in her heart and in the love she had for Stephen. As time went on, Mary tried to shake off the worries about the future. Ever since Stephen, the black man she loved so deeply, had proposed, Mary had poured all her energy into preparing for their wedding. She wanted to focus on the joy, on the excitement of the approaching big day, but she couldn't escape the worried looks from her family and friends. One afternoon, while having lunch with her close friends, the usual chatter was suddenly interrupted by a question Mary hadn't expected. Ellie, her best friend, leaned forward and asked softly, "Mary, we all love you and Stephen, but are you truly happy with this decision? I mean, are you sure this is what you want?" Mary paused mid-bite, her eyes widening at the sudden question. "What do you mean?" she asked, sensing the defensiveness in her voice. Ellie hesitated, glancing at the others around the table. "It's just, we worry about you. You're always putting others first, always sacrificing. We just want to make sure you're doing this because you truly want to, not because you feel like you should." Mary set her sandwich down, her appetite disappearing. "Of course I want this," she replied, trying to keep her voice steady. "Stephen makes me happy. Isn't that the most important thing?" Laura, another friend, chimed in. "It is, but Mary, this is your whole life. Have you thought about the challenges that might come up, especially with you two coming from such different backgrounds?" That night, sitting alone in her living room, Mary stared at the stack of wedding invitations she hadn't yet sent out. Her friends' words echoed in her mind. It seemed like everyone thought she was making some sort of sacrifice, that marrying Stephen wasn't about love, but about kindness. But Mary didn't see it that way. She loved Stephen for nothing more than who he was. He might be a black man, and she was a white woman with a disability. But to her, that wasn't the most important thing. Closing her eyes, Mary recalled the moments she and Stephen had shared. They had held hands in the park when she confessed her fears about the future. He had listened to her with patience and understanding, always smiling and reassuring her when she needed it most. Mary loved Stephen for his heart, for his generous spirit, and for the sincerity in everything he said. A sense of determination began to rise within Mary. She didn't want to let the gossip or skeptical looks from others shake her belief in the love she had for Stephen. Yes, they would face challenges, perhaps the judgmental glances from outsiders or the daily difficulties of life. But wasn't every marriage full of challenges? Life wasn't easy for anyone, whether they were able-bodied or not. What mattered was that Mary loved Stephen with all her heart, and she knew he loved her just as much. Mary understood that their love transcended societal expectations and the difficulties ahead. On their wedding day, she would walk down the aisle not only to marry Stephen, but to affirm to herself that their love was strong enough to overcome anything. On her wedding day, Mary sat in front of the mirror, her eyes fixed on her reflection. Her heart was racing, a mix of excitement and anxiety flooding her mind. The pristine white wedding dress, adorned with soft lace and shimmering beads, hung on the door. This was the dress she had dreamed of since childhood, but now everything felt distant. Her thoughts were no longer on the dress or the vibrant flowers waiting at the church. The only thing on her mind was the moment soon to come. She would walk down the aisle to meet Stephen, the man she loved more than she had ever loved herself. "Mary, are you ready?" called Ellie, Mary's best friend from the next room. Ellie had been with her since early morning, meticulously helping her prepare, doing her hair and assisting with the dress. Throughout the wedding preparations, Ellie had been more than just a bridesmaid. She was Mary's emotional rock, especially when the doubts began to creep in. "I think I'm ready," Mary replied softly, almost in a whisper. She turned to glance at the dress again, her hands trembling as she touched the delicate lace. She reassured herself that she was prepared, but the waves of nervousness continued to rise within her. Yet, deep down, she knew that the love she had for Stephen would carry her through it all. Ellie gently helped Mary into the wedding dress, carefully adjusting every detail. Meanwhile, Mary's mind wandered, drifting toward the church where Stephen awaited her. She imagined the crowd of family and friends sitting there, each with their own emotions. Some had supported them from the beginning, people who loved Mary and Stephen, and believed their love could overcome any obstacle. But she was also aware that others harbored doubts. They would sit in the pews, whispering to each other, questioning whether she was making the right choice. A white woman with a disability marrying a black man. This was still something beyond some people's acceptance. But Mary no longer paid attention to those thoughts. Today wasn't about them, and it wasn't about what they thought. Today was about her and Stephen. It was a day of love, of two souls finding each other amidst a world full of challenges. She softly adjusted the veil over her face, the sheer fabric falling lightly onto her skin. Suddenly, a wave of strength surged through her. This wasn't a dream. It was real. This moment was truly happening, and she was about to become Stephen's wife. The excitement mixed with the nervousness made her feel like she was standing on the edge of both the most wonderful and the most challenging moments of her life. Mary looked at herself in the mirror one last time, but this time, she didn't just see a bride. She saw herself, a woman who had overcome many obstacles to find happiness. Life had not been easy, but the love she shared with Stephen had helped them rise above it all. Her legs may have been weakened by her old injury, but her heart was stronger than ever. She knew that love wasn't just about romance or happy moments. It was the strength that helped two people face prejudice and push through the barriers life placed before them. And today, as she walked down the aisle, everything would change forever. Meanwhile, the church slowly filled with guests, each one taking their seats in anticipation of the ceremony. The air buzzed with excitement and curiosity. Some guests had never met Stephen, and they couldn't hide their eagerness to see the black man who had won Mary's heart. Others, who had known him for years, admired the deep love and patience they had witnessed throughout the couple's relationship. Yet, there were still a few who wondered about the couple's future, questioning how they could navigate the challenges ahead. "I just hope she knows what she's doing," one of Mary's distant relatives whispered to her seatmate. "I've heard he's a good man," the seatmate replied. "Maybe that's all that matters." Despite the murmurs and curiosity, there was no denying the excitement that filled the room, as everyone eagerly awaited the moment the ceremony would begin. Each passing minute heightened the anticipation as all eyes focused on the altar where Stephen was seated. Stephen, the black man about to marry Mary, exuded calmness and confidence, a stark contrast to the nervous energy surrounding him. Even on what was the most significant day of his life, Stephen showed no signs of anxiety. His perfectly tailored suit accentuated the brightness in his eyes filled with happiness and gratitude. For him, none of the minor details or people's opinions mattered today. The only thing that held his attention was the commitment he was about to make to the woman he deeply loved. Over the years, Stephen had faced his fair share of doubt and discrimination, but those experiences had only deepened his understanding that uncertainty is always present in life. However, deep inside, he knew one thing for certain. Mary loved him with all her heart, and their love had stood strong against every challenge. That was enough to keep him steady and grounded as the pressures of the day mounted. He knew today wasn't about proving anything to anyone. It was about solidifying his love for Mary, the woman who had shown him a love so pure that no one else ever could. As he waited, Stephen could hear the whispers, the soft conversations among the guests. Some were supportive, others curious, and, of course, some harbored doubts. Occasionally, he caught a few glances full of skepticism, but Stephen had long since learned to disregard those looks. Today wasn't about them. It was about his love for Mary, the woman who made his life whole. In a separate part of the church, in the bridal suite, Mary was taking deep breaths to calm her nerves. She sat in her stunning white gown, trying to suppress the growing anxiety within her. Mary, a gentle white woman with a radiant smile, had faced many challenges throughout her life due to her disability. She knew that today was not just her wedding day. It was the beginning of a new chapter, one where she and Stephen would face whatever challenges came their way together. As her father entered the room, his eyes welled up with emotion. He looked at his daughter in her wedding dress, filled with a sense of pride that words couldn't express. "You look beautiful, Mary," he said, his voice thick with emotion. Mary gave him a soft smile, though the nervousness still hadn't entirely left her. "Dad, do you think I'm doing the right thing?" she asked, her voice trembling. Her father paused, looking at her with warm, thoughtful eyes. "At first, I wasn't sure," he admitted. "Like everyone else, I had my worries. But then, I saw the way Stephen looks at you, and the way you look at him. That's all I needed to know that you're making the right choice." His words eased the tension in Mary's heart. She nodded, tears beginning to stream down her face. "I love Stephen so much, Dad," she whispered. "I know you do," he replied, his voice full of love and understanding. He squeezed her hand tightly, ready to walk her down the aisle and give her to the man she had chosen as her husband. At that moment, Mary knew that all the doubts and fears had vanished. The most important thing was the love between her and Stephen, a love that transcended all barriers. The soft melody of the wedding march began to play, signaling that the long-awaited moment had arrived. Mary stood at the entrance to the bridal suite, her heart pounding as her father gently took her arm. It was time to walk down the aisle. With each step toward the church doors, her mind raced with thoughts of the day ahead. The soft murmurs of the guests filled the air as the double doors slowly opened, revealing the beautiful bride standing next to her father. All eyes turned toward her, admiring her grace and beauty. But for Mary, the moment felt almost surreal. As she and her father walked down the aisle, the church seemed to stretch out, the distance to the altar feeling endless. Her legs trembled, not just from nerves, but from the weight of the secret she carried. She tightened her grip on her father's hand, seeking comfort in his silent presence. At the end of the aisle, Stephen stood waiting. His dark skin stood out sharply against his white tuxedo, his tall, strong frame radiating strength and calm. His eyes were fixed on Mary, and despite the crowd surrounding them, it was as though they were the only two people in the room. His gaze, full of love and pride, locked onto hers, causing her heart to race even faster. As their eyes met, all of Mary's worries seemed to dissolve. The world outside vanished, leaving only her and Stephen, two souls ready to commit to each other. Stephen had always been her support, the man who stood by her through every challenge, never treating her differently, despite her pretending to have a disability. Yet, within Mary, a heavy burden remained, a truth she had kept hidden from the man she loved, the man she was about to marry. As they reached the altar, Stephen extended his hand, taking Mary's trembling one in his. The warmth of his touch reassured her, allowing her to savor the joy of the day for a moment. Her father stepped back, and she stood beside Stephen, her heart swelling with emotion as the minister began the ceremony. The room was silent, save for the occasional sniffle from emotional guests. Some wiped away tears as they watched the couple stand together, ready to exchange vows. The day was perfect. The flowers bloomed brightly, and sunlight streamed through the stained glass windows, illuminating the space around them. But as Mary looked deeper into Stephen's eyes, she felt something shift. A pang of guilt struck her like a dark cloud passing over the sun. The lie she had carried for months now felt heavier than ever. Stephen noticed the change in her expression. His brow furrowed, concern filling his eyes. He squeezed her hand tighter, silently asking, "Are you okay?" Mary forced herself to smile and nodded, but her heart wasn't at ease. Between them lay a secret unspoken, a wall she had built on her own. And she knew, deep in her heart, that she couldn't go through with this ceremony without telling him the truth. The minister's voice echoed, but Mary wasn't listening. Her mind was entirely focused on Stephen and the words she knew she needed to say. Her throat tightened with guilt, and her heart raced as the moment of decision approached. Then, just as the minister was about to start the vows, Mary spoke up. "Wait," she said, her voice breaking the silence in the church. Her heart pounded in her chest as her words hung in the air. A murmur rippled through the crowd as the guests reacted to the unexpected interruption. Stephen tightened his grip on her hand, his eyes wide with surprise. "Mary?" he asked softly, his voice full of concern and confusion. She couldn't keep this secret any longer. Not here, not now, when they were about to begin their life together. She looked at Stephen, her gaze filled with both love and fear. "I need to tell you something," Mary said, her voice trembling, but loud enough for everyone to hear. She could feel the eyes of everyone in the room on her, but she pushed it all aside. This moment was for Stephen. Only for Stephen. Stephen gazed at her with worry. "What is it?" he asked gently. Mary took a deep breath, summoning all the courage she had left. Her hands shook as she looked down, unable to meet his eyes any longer. I've been lying to you, Stephen," she confessed, her voice breaking with emotion. "I'm not who you think I am." A gasp swept through the church. Stephen's face paled, the calmness replaced by confusion and worry. "What do you mean?" he asked, his voice tinged with anxiety. Mary's heart ached as she saw the pain in his eyes. She swallowed hard, forcing herself to continue. "I'm not disabled," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "I've been pretending all this time." Silence blanketed the room. For a moment, it felt like time had stopped. Mary could feel the weight of the crowd's shock, but nothing compared to the guilt gnawing at her as she saw the color drain from Stephen's face. "You're not—" "What?" Stephen whispered, his voice cracking. He stepped back, releasing her hand as he tried to process what he had just heard. "You've been pretending?" Mary nodded, tears streaming down her cheeks. "Yes. I didn't know how to find someone who would love me for who I am. Not for my looks, not for money, not for anything else," she explained, her voice filled with regret. "I wanted to make sure you loved me for me, without knowing about my background or anything else." Stephen stood there, stunned, his mind spinning with thoughts and emotions. He had always known Mary as a kind, compassionate woman who had faced physical challenges with grace. But now, everything had changed. "I can't believe this," Stephen mumbled, more to himself than to her. His chest tightened with pain, anger, and confusion. "You lied to me?" Mary's heart shattered as she saw the hurt in his eyes. "I never meant to hurt you, Stephen. I swear I didn't," she pleaded. I didn't know how to protect myself. I've been used before, for my money, for my status, and I was scared no one would love me for who I truly am." Stephen's mind was a storm of conflicting thoughts. He had fallen in love with Mary, not because of her appearance, not because of money, but because of her heart. But now, he realized that she hadn't trusted him enough to show him her true self. The silence between them was heavy, as Stephen tried to make sense of everything. He looked at her, his heart torn between love and betrayal. He wanted to be angry, but he also understood the fear that had led her to keep this secret. "Why didn't you trust me, Mary?" he asked quietly, his voice filled with hurt. "Why didn't you believe that I could love you for who you are?" Mary wiped her tears, her hands trembling. "I was scared," she admitted softly. "Scared that if you knew the truth, you wouldn't want me anymore. But Stephen, I love you, and I know I hurt you, but the love I have for you was always real." That's the one thing that wasn't a lie. In the church, the air grew thick with tension, as if all the sound had been sucked out of the room. All eyes were on Mary, who had just revealed a shocking secret. For so long, she had appeared as the fragile white woman in a crutch, someone Stephen had loved, cared for, and supported throughout their entire relationship. But now, all of that seemed to crumble before him. The woman he had deeply loved had pretended to be disabled. The truth revealed on their wedding day shattered everything around Stephen. He couldn't believe what he was hearing. In an instant, all the beautiful memories they had shared, walks in the park, long conversations, the times he had helped her through physical challenges, now seemed like a farce. "Why would you do that?" he asked, his voice breaking from the shock and disappointment. His eyes, full of hurt, bore into the woman he had thought was the most genuine person in his life. Mary was speechless, her blue eyes filled with tears, her voice trembling as if she no longer had the strength to speak. "I'm sorry, Stephen. I was afraid that if you knew the truth, you wouldn't love me anymore." Mary's answer wasn't enough to calm the storm raging inside Stephen. He looked at the woman he had once wanted to protect for the rest of his life. But now, all he saw was someone who had deceived him from the very beginning. "I loved you for who you are, not because of the crutch," Stephen said, trying to control his rising anger. "Did you think I loved you only because you were weak and needed my care? How could you believe that about me?" Mary sobbed, tears falling freely down her face. "I didn't know what else to do," she whispered. "At first I was just scared, but then everything became too complicated, and I didn't know how to stop. I was afraid that if I told you the truth, I would lose you." But for Stephen, that wasn't the answer he needed. He had always trusted Mary and believed that the love they shared was real and unbreakable. Now, he felt as if everything he knew about her had been distorted. "You don't understand," he said, his voice trembling with frustration. "I loved you for who you were, but now, I don't know what's real anymore." Mary wanted to explain, but the words wouldn't come. She looked at Stephen with pleading eyes, hoping he could forgive her, but Stephen couldn't do that right now. "I need time," Stephen said, his voice thick with emotion. "I can't go through with this, knowing you lied to me from the start. I need time to think." Unable to take it any longer, Stephen turned and walked out of the church. His heart raced, and he knew if he stayed another second, he wouldn't be able to control his emotions. His footsteps echoed in the heavy silence, each step seeming to carry him further from everything he thought he understood about love and life. Outside, Stephen took a deep breath, trying to steady the pounding in his chest. He stood on the cold stone steps, staring out into the distance, but his mind was swirling with 1,000 conflicting thoughts. The crisp autumn air did little to calm him. All he could feel was the pain and betrayal. Stephen sat down on the steps, his head in his hands, struggling to make sense of what had just happened. He replayed every moment they had shared. Mary had always brought him peace, a gentle love that carried a quiet strength. He had loved her for her empathy, her kindness, and the beauty of her soul. But now, he had to confront the reality that she had deliberately deceived him, not for any reason other than unnecessary fear. Mary had been afraid that he wouldn't love her unless she appeared weak, and she needed him to care for her. She had trapped herself in the facade of a disability to test his love. But the truth? He loved her not because she was weak, but because she was Mary, a strong, independent, and resilient woman. Now he felt betrayed, not by the revelation about the crutch, but because she hadn't trusted him enough to show him her true self. Stephen looked up at the sky, the clouds drifting slowly above, a reminder of time passing and the wrong choices people can make. He knew he couldn't rush into deciding what came next. His love for Mary was still there, but could he get past this betrayal? Could he forgive her for not trusting in their love from the beginning? The thoughts continued to circle in Stephen's mind. He couldn't deny that his feelings for Mary were still deep, but at the same time, the pain of her deception was something he couldn't easily shake. He knew that no relationship could survive without trust, and now that trust between them had been severely shaken. As the emotions settled slightly, Stephen realized that he needed time to reflect on their love and relationship. He loved Mary. There was no doubt about that. But he also needed to be sure that she wouldn't make this mistake again. He needed to know that she would be honest with him. No more secrets, no more lies. After sitting for a while, Stephen stood, feeling the weight of his thoughts still heavy on his shoulders. He decided not to make any hasty decisions. His love for Mary wasn't something that could easily be broken, but repairing their relationship would require time and effort from both of them. He needed to listen to his heart and know that no matter what happened, love couldn't be based on fleeting feelings. It had to be rooted in trust and sincerity. Stephen walked toward the nearby park, the one he and Mary often visited to talk and admire the scenery. It had once been their place of peace, where he had promised to love and protect her for the rest of their lives. But now, he felt an emptiness inside, a pain he couldn't put into words. Sitting on the familiar bench, Stephen watched the trees as their leaves turned shades of red and gold in the autumn breeze. He knew that despite the hurt, their love was still there, but it needed to be rebuilt on a stronger foundation. He couldn't continue this relationship without complete trust, and that meant Mary had to learn to be honest, not just with him, but with herself. Stephen closed his eyes, letting his thoughts drift with the wind. He knew that the journey to heal their hearts and their relationship wouldn't be easy, but if there was true love, anything could be overcome. He was willing to try, but first, he needed time to heal and think about everything that had happened. As the sun began to set, Stephen rose from the bench, feeling a small sense of relief. He knew that, whatever the outcome, he would have to face Mary, be honest with her about his feelings, and talk about their future. Time would give him the clarity he needed to make the right decision. Inside the small room, Mary sat quietly, her eyes swollen from crying, as she tried to steady her trembling breath. She had just experienced one of the hardest moments of her life, and what happened next could completely change her future. Stephen, the man she loved with all her heart, had walked out of the church, needing time to process the truth he had just learned, that Mary had lied about her disability. Mary's heart felt shattered. She loved Stephen more than anything, but her lie had now become the biggest obstacle between them. She had pretended to be disabled throughout their relationship with Stephen. While the deception had stemmed from fear and insecurity, it had now become a source of deep pain. As Mary sat alone, trying to reflect on all that she and Stephen had built together, memories flooded her mind. Every moment they had shared, every laugh, every deep conversation, every time he held her when she was vulnerable. It had all been so beautiful. Mary knew that their love had always been genuine. There was no denying that. But the truth about her not being truly disabled had shaken the foundation of their relationship. Mary had chosen the path of lies for reasons that now seemed unclear. She once felt unworthy, afraid that Stephen wouldn't love her if he knew she was completely fine. She had hidden, thinking it would protect her from the fear of rejection. But now, what she feared most had become reality. The lie had not kept her love. It had only pushed Stephen further away. Tears continued to fall down Mary's cheeks, the weight of her sorrow pressing heavily on her heart. She knew that Stephen loved her, not because of the wheelchair, not because she appeared vulnerable, but because of who she truly was. But she had complicated everything. Not only did Stephen have to face the truth that she wasn't disabled, but he also had to grapple with the sense of betrayal. She remembered the first time she met Stephen. He had been a man full of strength, resilience, and kindness. He hadn't cared about her use of a crutch. In fact, he had helped her feel more comfortable and confident in every interaction they had. Every time he smiled, his bright eyes made her heart warm. Those moments had helped her believe that, whether she was pretending or not, Stephen loved her for who she was. But now, with everything laid bare, it felt like her world was crumbling around her. Mary deeply regretted not telling Stephen the truth sooner. She should have trusted in the love they had built. She shouldn't have let fear and insecurity hold her back from the very beginning. Now, all she could do was sit alone in this room, thinking about the uncertain future ahead of her. Stephen had walked out immediately after hearing the truth. He hadn't yelled, he hadn't raged, but the disappointment and hurt were clear on his face as he turned and left the church. Mary understood that he needed time to think and to process his feelings. She didn't blame him. She too needed time to understand what she had done and how to possibly salvage their relationship. As she sat in the quiet room, Mary wondered if Stephen would come back. She didn't know the answer, and that made her fear grow even more. But she knew one thing. She wouldn't give up. She would face the truth, apologize, and do whatever it took to show Stephen that her love was real, even if everything else had been false. Mary wiped away the last of her tears, took a deep breath, and stood up. Her heart was still heavy with the hurt she had caused herself, but now she had made a decision. She would fight for her love. Mary stepped out of the small room, her gaze determined and full of hope. She didn't know how she would face Stephen, but she knew she wouldn't let her lies destroy the best relationship of her life. As Mary walked, anxiety and determination warred within her. She knew that if given a second chance, she would do everything to keep Stephen by her side. No more hiding, no more lies, only the truth and genuine love. Standing in the small room at the back of the church, Mary felt the walls closing in around her. She took a deep breath to regain her composure before stepping outside. The air felt stifling, almost as if she couldn't breathe. But she knew she couldn't hide any longer. Today, the day she had once looked forward to with so much joy and hope, had turned into a nightmare, all because of the secret she had kept for so long. As the door opened, Mary walked back into the church, where hundreds of eyes, those of family, friends, and guests, were all fixed on her. The tension in the room was almost unbearable, with everyone sensing that something had gone wrong. Small whispers arose from the back rows, but Mary paid no attention to them. Her eyes were locked on Stephen, the man she was supposed to marry, pain and hope etched clearly on his face. As she approached Stephen, her legs trembled with nerves. She stopped in front of him, her heart pounding as she looked up to meet his eyes. His gaze was deep, filled with unspoken questions. Her heart felt as if it were breaking. She had lived in fear for so long that if Stephen knew the truth, he would leave her. And now, the moment of reckoning had arrived. "Stephen," she began, her voice shaking as if it would disappear if she wasn't careful. "Why didn't you ask me? Why didn't you try to find out the truth?" Stephen swallowed hard, his throat tight. He had waited silently for an answer he knew would change everything. But now that he was facing the truth, he wasn't sure if he was strong enough to hear it. "Mary, I loved you with all my heart. I trusted you. But why couldn't you tell me the truth from the start?" Mary bit her lip, trying to hold back the tears threatening to spill. "I was so scared, Stephen. I was afraid that if you knew the truth, you wouldn't love me anymore. I was afraid you would leave me like everyone else." She paused, looking deeply into his eyes, hoping for some understanding. "I've been hurt so many times before. People always judged me by what they saw on the outside, and never saw who I was inside. I pretended to be disabled, because I thought that was the only way to find someone who would truly love me." Stephen's brow furrowed, his face hardening for a moment as he absorbed her confession. "Why would you think that you had to do that to find love?" Mary wrung her hands together, tears beginning to spill down her pale face. "You don't understand, Stephen. I've lived my whole life under judgment. People always looked at my appearance, and I never knew if they loved me for who I was. When I met you, I saw that you were different, but I was still too afraid. I thought if you believed I was vulnerable, you would find me special, and I would know if you truly loved me." Stephen looked at her, his chest tightening with a mix of anger and sadness. "You thought my love for you depended on whether or not you were disabled?" he asked, his voice low but heavy with emotion. "Mary, I loved you not because of anything about your appearance or circumstances. I loved you for who you are. But you lied to me, and that makes me feel like I wasn't important enough for you to trust." Mary's heart shattered at his words. She knew Stephen was deeply hurt, and she knew she had been wrong. But she also knew she had done it all, out of fear of losing the person she loved most. "I know. I was wrong," Mary said, her voice breaking as she cried. "I wish I had been brave enough to tell you from the beginning. But I didn't know how to believe that this love was real. I just wanted to know that you loved me for who I was, not for anything else." Stephen stepped forward, gently taking her hand, his eyes now softened a little. "Mary, the only thing I've ever loved has been you, the real you. That's never changed. But now, with the truth out, we can't go back to how things were. I need to know that from now on, there will be no more lies." Mary nodded, feeling a sense of relief slowly start to build inside her. She had been afraid for so long, But now she understood that love couldn't be built on lies. "Stephen, I promise you," she said, her voice still trembling but filled with determination. "From now on, no more secrets. I love you, and I'm ready to spend the rest of my life proving that to you." Stephen sighed, his eyes filled with emotion. "I love you too, Mary. But trust has been broken, and we'll need time to rebuild it. If you truly want to change, I'll give us that chance." Mary smiled through her tears. She knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy, but she was ready to face every challenge, as long as Stephen was by her side. She understood that true love wasn't just about feelings. It was about honesty and trust. They walked forward together, hand in hand, ready to face the future. A future that might be full of challenges, but also full of hope. This wasn't just a wedding. It was a new beginning for a real and lasting love. In the quiet but warm atmosphere of the church, all eyes were on Mary and Stephen. The soft glow of candles flickered gently, and the subtle fragrance of white flowers mixed with the fading light of the late afternoon. The room, once filled with a sense of solemnity, now carried a deeper stillness as everyone watched the pivotal moment unfold. Mary slowly extended her hand toward Stephen, her movement steady and full of resolve. And he took her hand with a gentleness that only someone who truly understands and loves can offer. Mary was a beautiful white woman who had always felt she wasn't enough in the eyes of others. Yet, the love Stephen had for her was never about that. Stephen, a strong black man with a warm smile, had come into Mary's life like a breath of fresh air, making her heart flutter. From the moment their eyes first met, neither of them could have imagined that their special bond would lead to such an emotionally charged day like today. The priest, standing at the altar, sensed the shift in the atmosphere as Stephen and Mary exchanged a tender gaze. This ceremony was far more than a regular ritual. For both of them, it was the union of two souls who had weathered many storms, overcoming ridicule, prejudice, and the doubts of outsiders. Every vow they were about to make wasn't just words. It was the culmination of a love that was real and profound, one that transcended appearances and circumstances. Mary looked into Stephen's eyes, her vision blurred by tears of happiness. She remembered the painful moments when she thought no one could ever love her. But Stephen had shown her that love wasn't dependent on physical appearances. He loved her not only for being Mary, but also for her strength and resilience. The challenges they had faced together had only strengthened the bond between them. Meanwhile, Stephen, standing tall with his heart pounding in his chest, recalled the many trials they had endured. He knew many people had questioned their relationship. Could a black man and a white woman maintain a strong and enduring love? But Stephen had never cared about those voices. The only thing that mattered to him was Mary. She was the woman he loved deeply, and today he would prove it once more, in front of everyone. The voice of the priest broke the emotional silence in the room. He began the ceremony, guiding them through the sacred rituals. When it came time for the vows, both Stephen and Mary felt the weight of the moment. They weren't just two people about to become husband and wife. They were two hearts that had faced every challenge, every obstacle to be together. "Stephen," the priest began, "do you take Mary as your wife through hardship or happiness, in sickness or health, until the end of your days?" Stephen took a deep breath, his eyes filled with determination and love as he gazed at Mary. "I do," he said, his voice steady yet trembling with emotion. "I will love and protect her, not just today, but forever." Mary smiled through her tears, knowing that every word Stephen said came from his genuine heart. When it was her turn, she looked at the priest and nodded gently. "Mary, do you take Stephen as your husband through every challenge of life and promise to stand by him for the rest of your days?" "I do," Mary replied, her voice soft, yet filled with determination. "I will love him, not just because he is my husband, but because he is my everything." As the vows were exchanged, the atmosphere in the church seemed to pause, as if the entire world had vanished, leaving only the two of them. They had overcome all prejudices and barriers to reach this moment. When they kissed, the room erupted in applause and cheers from the witnesses. At that moment, both Mary and Stephen realized that everything they had gone through was worth it. It wasn't just the pain, the stares, or the whispered judgments. Their love had proven that no differences, be they of race, disability, or circumstance, could separate two souls truly connected. They had chosen to love each other and stood firm in that choice. After the wedding, as guests left the church, offering smiles and blessings, Mary felt her heart lighter than ever. She knew there were still many challenges ahead, but with Stephen by her side, she had no more fear. Stephen, too, knew that he had married not just a woman, but someone whose resilience and courage he admired. He loved her for who she was, not because she was a woman with a disability, but because she was Mary, the woman he was ready to protect for the rest of his life. Their love story was not just a simple tale of romance, but a symbol of endurance and bravery. For Mary, the biggest surprise wasn't just marrying the man of her dreams, but realizing that, in Stephen's eyes, she had always been perfect, despite any imperfections. Together, they had proven to everyone that love knows no boundaries or conditions. On that day, Mary and Stephen not only married, but also began a new journey, a journey full of challenges, but also brimming with faith and hope. And for them, the future had only just begun. As the wedding car drove away from the church, the streets lined with fresh flowers and warm wishes from friends and family, Mary held Stephen's hand tightly, feeling the warmth of his touch. She knew that every day with him would be memorable, not just for the happy moments, but for the shared strength, understanding, and support they would offer each other through every difficulty. For them, marriage wasn't just a legal commitment or a formal ceremony. It was the beginning of a new life together, a chance to build a future where love was the foundation and mutual understanding the key. Both Mary and Stephen understood that love wasn't always easy, but they were ready to face anything together because they believed in each other. Late in the afternoon, as they returned to their small home, the golden light of the sunset filled the room, creating a warm and peaceful atmosphere. Mary gazed out the window, savoring every moment of their happy day. Her heart was full of gratitude, not just for having Stephen by her side, but for the strength she had found to overcome every obstacle to stand here, starting a new life. Stephen looked at Mary, his eyes filled with joy and pride. He knew that, with her, he could face anything, and their future would always be full of love and hope. Their home, though modest, was filled with joy and memories. Every corner of the room reminded them of the special moments they had shared. The small table by the window, where Stephen often sat writing, was where Mary would gaze at him, proud of his tireless dedication. She loved the way he carefully crafted each sentence and each thought, not only reflecting his creative soul, but also revealing a man who was deeply caring, always thinking about their future together. Mary recalled the difficult days of the past. There were times when she thought she couldn't make it, when everything seemed too overwhelming for a young woman like herself. But with Stephen always standing by her side, supporting and encouraging her, Mary found the strength within herself. She remembered the long nights filled with tears, the moments when she almost gave up. But it was their love and faith in each other that kept her going. She had learned to trust in herself and their future. And now, everything seemed more beautiful than ever. Stephen, who always understood her better than anyone, had noticed the change in Mary. She was no longer the fragile and easily hurt girl she once was. Now, she was a confident and strong woman, ready to face whatever life threw at her. He felt immense pride seeing the woman he loved grow stronger and more mature with each step. It didn't just deepen their love, but also strengthened his determination to protect and care for her for the rest of his life. The sunset continued to bathe the world in gold, the last rays of the day highlighting Mary's soft brown hair, making her look like an angel on earth. Stephen stepped closer, gently embracing her from behind, planting a soft kiss on her hair. "I'm so lucky to have you in my life," he whispered, his voice warm and sincere. Mary smiled, feeling his arms around her. She didn't need to say anything else. At that moment, they both understood that they had found their safe harbor. Life might never be perfect, but for them, moments like this were enough to create happiness. They didn't need luxury or material things. Just having each other was enough. Mary and Stephen had chosen a path, the path of love and understanding. And they knew that no matter what difficulties lay ahead, as long as they held each other's hand, everything would be easier to bear. That night, they sat at their small table, enjoying a simple but cozy dinner. They talked about plans, unfinished dreams, and even distant hopes. The flickering candlelight reflected off Mary's radiant face, and once again, Stephen felt his heart flutter, just as it had when they first fell in love. They both knew that the road ahead was long, but they weren't afraid, because they had each other, and that was all that mattered. This wedding wasn't just a special event. It was a testament to unconditional love and the courage to overcome all obstacles. The unexpected moments had left both the bride and groom overwhelmed with joy. What do you think of love that rises above all challenges? Share your thoughts. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel so you don't miss any more touching stories like this one. See you next time.